At 8:30 this morning, I preached about the novelist Italo Calvino's observations about how easy it is for us to have low expectations, to be the sort of person who, on principle, no longer expects anything of anything. You know that the best you can expect is to avoid the worst. And that's how the sermon began. But about 45 minutes, I received some terrible news. Bruce Bearden, who was long a member of the cathedral and also a staff member, died last night. And it's hard for me to even approach the subject of today's sermon without thinking of him. Many of you don't know him, but he was somebody who had a delightful Southern sense of humor, just a wonderful, gracious person. He really is the person who made things happen behind the scenes. He had just incredible good judgment about, what to do about difficult decisions and easy decisions. He was someone whose good judgment and pragmatic sensibility we relied on tremendously. We have been disappointed so many times in our life. Are there reasons to have hope? Now, lately I've been reading books written by authors who don't believe in God, and it's been a wonderful blessing to walk with them and to try to see the world through their perspective. I most recently finished reading Kiran Setya's book, Life is Hard, How Philosophy Can Help Us Find Our Way. His last chapter describes hope as, quote, wishful thinking. He goes on to say, in the end, it seems, there is no hope. The lights go out. And later, in a slightly more positive vein, he says, we can hope that life has meaning, a slow, unsteady march toward a more just future. The other book that I've been reading is William McCaskill's book, What We Owe the Future. It's about the way that we might prevent the collapse of human culture from threats like nuclear war, engineered pathogens, and runaway artificial general intelligence. He points out that there is a massive amount of suffering, human suffering and the suffering of animals all around us. And he even has a scale of suffering of negative 100 on this side and positive 100 on this side. And he wonders if life is worth living, if we are actually on the positive side of that scale. Does life have meaning? Questions like that weren't even asked during the ancient times, during the medieval period, or even into the early modern period. Do you know when the phrase, the meaning of life, first was published in English? 1834. Before then, this question did not occur to most people, perhaps because most of them assumed that we lived in a world guided by its creator. Now, although these books written by atheist authors seem so different, they share a common outlook, a common spirit. First, you may not know what to expect of the future, but it will be a human thing. There is no help beyond ourselves. Second, they exaggerate the extent to which human beings can comprehend or control the world. Third, they fail to recognize that there are different stories for understanding our place in the universe, and that these have a huge influence on our sense of fulfillment. Well-being is in part subjective. We have to decide whether to accept our life as an accident or to accept our life as a precious gift. Finally, these authors lack a sense that human beings have a special dignity, or that we might experience God as present with us. In my forum interview with Cornel West, my old teacher, he reminded me of how much he loved Hans-Georg Gadamer's book, Wahrheit und Methode. That's something that Greg Kimura and I have in common. We read the book in the same class at the same time. But the very beginning of the book begins with a kind of curious, puzzling poem by the Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke. And it's a strange poem, but I'm going to begin with it. Catch only what you've thrown yourself, all is mere skill and little gain. But when you're suddenly the catcher of a ball thrown by an eternal partner with accurate and measured swing towards you, to your center, in an arch from the great bridge building of God, why catching then becomes a power, not yours, a world's. So how do we catch the world that God is offering to us? This morning I'm going to talk about an interpretation of the book of Matthew by my friend Herman Waitchen, a famous biblical scholar. I'm not trying to communicate facts to you. I'm not trying to help you to understand complicated expressions or ideas. Instead, I long to open a door so that you might experience the truth of hope, the recognition that at the heart of all reality lies the love of God. Now, today is the second Sunday in the church calendar year. And over the next 12 months, we are going to be studying Matthew very carefully every single Sunday when we gather together. Scholars say that 600 of the 1,000 verses in it, along with half of its vocabulary, all come from the book of Mark. An additional 225 verses come from a saying source and other oral traditions. So, although Matthew is borrowing so much from other places, Matthew is utterly original. Although the first hearers are highly urban people living in the regional capital of Antioch at the very edge of the Roman Empire, really, Matthew is speaking to us. Now, in the year 70 AD, a catastrophic event threatened to obliterate the entire religion of the Jews. Roman forces attacked Jerusalem, and they destroyed the house of God, God's house on earth, along with all the practices and religious traditions associated with it. And it seemed as if the entire religion was going to come to an end. Now, I want to tell you about 3 different alternative visions for the future that people in that generation had. The first was the way of the Pharisees, led by Yohanan ben Zakkai. Legend has it that he was actually secreted out of Jerusalem when the Romans were invaded and carried in a coffin, and that's how he escaped. But he worked out a kind of arrangement with the Romans, promising that he would be subservient to the Romans if the Romans would allow them to practice their religion. Zakkai asserted that the study of Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, was as important as worshiping God in the temple. He substituted hesed, kindness or love or mercy, in place of the demolished temple. He said that God can be at the center of people's lives through a reconciliation that is realizable through deeds of mercy that are fulfilled by observing the law. Now, my friend Herman Waitchen asserts that Matthew didn't agree with this vision because Matthew faulted it for something that you may have not thought of yet, and that is when you hold justiceness and applying to and keeping the law at the center of your faith, then it's easy to begin to look at the world as being composed of 2 kinds of people: the righteous people who are pure and clean, and the sinners who are impure and should be excluded. Matthew writes against that picture of religion. Now, there is a second solution at that time to the problem of how the faith should be, and it comes from what we call apocalyptic literature. And that is the parts of the Bible that are written about the end times, the end of the world. And in particular, there's one book called 2nd Baruch that is about this exact issue. The author is writing about the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem, but talking about the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians in the year 497 BC. So, writing about that destruction and the destruction he sees in his own time, he describes a vision of an angel descending to the temple and removing all the holy things. So you could imagine an angel coming here this morning and taking away the candlestick holders and the communion bread and the cups of wine and the chalice and everything that is holy in the building. And then the angel says, "He who guarded this house has left it." And the leaders of the church throw away the keys. And in a way, the temple is desanctified. It is no longer a holy place. And so in that picture of religion, the temple is no longer the place where God dwells. And the point of the holy person is to wait for God to restore the temple and for God to be in the temple again. Now, although Matthew is aware of both these views, the Pharisee view and the apocalyptic view, he chooses a different solution to the religious crisis. A different solution than to look at the world as being full of clean and unclean people, or simply waiting for a new temple. Matthew writes about who we are as people by describing who Jesus is. So on the one hand, Jesus is the son of David. He comes out of a particular people. He has a particular ethnicity, a particular height, a group of people who have a particular history in the world. But Jesus is also a new creation, which Herman Waitchen translates as the son of the human being. So we see this dual anthropology in the Hebrew Bible, which makes a division between nephesh, or soul, and basar, or flesh. In Greek, it's the difference between psyche, or soul, and soma, which is body. We see that in the Bible, in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And Jesus says, "Do not fear those who kill the body, the soma, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear the one who is able to destroy both soul and body in Gehenna." So Jesus is born in a physical body in Bethlehem as part of the Jewish community. And he goes and he teaches and heals the people who come to him. But Jesus also exists as soul, as the divine breath that gives all creatures life, as the first human of the new creation, as one who shows God's love for every person without exception. Jesus teaches that at the heart of all things lies forgiveness and grace. There are no people who are defined by their righteousness or by their sinfulness. At the deepest level of our existence, we are connected to each other and to God. The novelist Marilynne Robinson writes about how in modern times some people claim that science shows that there are no non-material things, that we do not have a soul. And in contrast, she writes about our shared intuition that the soul's non-physicality is no proof of its non-existence. It is the sacred and sanctifying aspect of human being. It is the self that stands apart from the self. It suffers injuries of a moral kind when the self that it is and that it is not lies or steals or murders. But the soul is untouched by the accidents that maim the self or kill it. She concludes writing, "I find the soul a valuable concept, a statement of the dignity of a human life and of the unutterable gravity of human action and experience." Can we have hope? Does life have meaning? Will my friend Bruce be okay? Perhaps you think of yourself as the sort of person who on principle no longer expects anything of anything. But you have a soul. God is closer to us than we are to ourselves. At the heart of all reality exists the love of God. The more thankful we are, the more we receive the gift of hope. In closing, I want to just leave the last words to the poet Mary Oliver, who has a poem called "The Gift," which I'm going to read. "Be still, my soul, and steadfast. Earth and heaven both are still watching, though time is draining from the clock. And your walk, that was confident and quick, has become slow. So be slow if you must, but let the heart still play its true part. Love still as you once loved, deeply and without patience. Let God and the world know you are grateful, that the gift has been given.